Gege, you was wrong for this one, man. You got this man killed off in the same week you about to put him in that box in the anime.
What's wrong with you, bro? What the heck? You tripping, bro? You tripping? Please! Please! No!
We back. We got that Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 236 review. Man, I spent a long time editing this joint, man, so I'll appreciate it if y'all hit that like button and if y'all hit that subscribe button. Let's try to get this video up to 50 likes, 50 subscribers. Thank you for almost 2K. We moving. Let's get into this chapter review. Let me hit you guys with something nice real quick. Am I the only one that genuinely thinks that Gojo got that ace treatment? Hear me out. I'm assuming that most people watching this video and who watch Jujutsu Kaisen are also One Piece fans. So if you're not a One Piece fan, this doesn't apply to you. So remember when they was trying to save Ace? I mean, Luffy went through the ringer. This guy got thrown around. He got tossed around like a rag doll. Dude was even throwing ice at the admirals. It was crazy. He almost lost his hands. He even had to box with his grandpa. But despite all that, right, he finally saves Ace and everything is nice. And then Ace dies. Like, what? Bruh. Like, I understand that this has to progress the plot, but just the way he dies is probably the thing that increases the shock value. And by this, right, when I say way, I'm talking the execution. So basically turning the expectations of the readers against them. Now, bearing in mind, there was a lot of things being said. Gojo was gonna die, Sukuna was gonna win, Gojo's gonna win, or Gojo's gonna get crippled. I stood more on the, okay, Gojo will probably win, but he'll definitely get crippled. But you see, the way the expectations was flipped against us, right, was that one, the narration box in the last chapter actually declared Gojo the winner. But I mean, let's be realistic, right? It's not as if it's one of these Scooby-Doo situations where Sukuna's like, okay, guys, haha, you got me. I'm going to give Megumi's body back and I'm totally a loser or whatever. I think we all knew that wasn't going to happen. But I think the fact that one, his death was off-screened was actually the craziest thing. Because if you look at the dialogue that Gojo actually states in the dream sequence, right, he was definitely uncertain about whether he was actually going to win or not, especially if Sukuna never actually had the 10 shadows. This is in comparison to how we spoke to Sukuna at the beginning of the fight. Completely two different people. So Gojo says to Geto, the loneliness that comes with unrivaled strength, the one that will teach you about love is. Gojo and Sukuna are both lonely. In the eras that they were both born in, they were both born with unrivaled strength. And of course, when people with unrivaled strength basically meet, they clash and one becomes a victor, in this case Sukuna. Gojo feels bad deep down because even though Gojo got the fight that he was longing for, a fight where he could go all out and he had a great time, he doesn't feel Sukuna got the same from that same fight because he clearly wasn't going all out. And I think that's ultimately what they both want. But of course, if you're superior to the person that you're fighting to the point where you don't have to go all out to take them down, then I mean, you're having a good time, but you're not having a great time. Gojo and Sukuna are two halves of the same coin, both looking for the same thing and try to find it in one another, which is basically a battle where they could go all out. And I mean, in this situation, Gojo got exactly what he wanted, which is why he smiles at Sukuna when Sukuna acknowledges his strength and declares that he'll never forget about him. So this was actually entertaining, right? Yeah, the death and the way Gojo lost was actually off-screen, fair enough. But in terms of how Sukuna did it, actually makes sense when you think of what his abilities actually are. Now, we've never actually been told what Sukuna's abilities are explicitly, especially by him. The only way we've been able to interpret what his abilities are is really based on analyzing what he actually does against previous opponents. Sukuna states that once Mahoraga receives an attack, it begins to slowly start adapting. but then if it receives an attack that's also similar to the original attack, the adaptation process begins to accelerate. Interestingly enough, when Mahoraga is fully adapted to a technique and whatnot, the analysis doesn't actually stop. It continues to further analyze and adapt even further. In chapter 232, Mahoraga was summoned and had fully adapted to Gojo's infinity by striking him. Mahoraga pretty much did this by altering its own cursed energy to an essence that could neutralize Gojo's infinity. But Sukuna can't actually do this and whatnot, so what he decided to do, he decided to wait for another round of adaptation, which is where Mahoraga decided to expand the target to not just Gojo, but to the world, space, basically reality itself. This was an adaptation method that Sukuna could actually copy, so this pretty much shows that there is an extent and a limit to how much Sukuna can actually copy when you think about it. Remember, in chapter 234, Gojo's arm gets cut off. Mahoraga slashes Gojo from a distance and Sukuna sits there and says, "Lovely." This is because this was an adaptation method that Sukuna could actually use to his advantage, one that he could actually copy. The size of the target that Mahoraga was targeting was pretty much existence itself. And I'm guessing because Gojo's infinity exists within that existence that Mahoraga was targeting, it was able to cut it. Mahoraga didn't cut Gojo, but Sukuna cut Gojo because it copied what Mahoraga's adaptation method showed him. That's probably the best interpretation I can pretty much come up with at this point, because remember, this whole joint was off screen, so no pictures and an explanation makes it a little tough to really get an answer here. Sukuna did say that it was pretty much impossible to pretty much pull off a technique like that, but if you could pull it off, it's actually quite effective. But I mean, at this point in time, I'm gonna need some pictures to really figure that whole joint out. Sukuna copying techniques isn't actually very surprising. He's pretty much been doing it the whole fight. He saw Gojo heal his burnout, and he also did the same thing. The blood manipulation technique, he copied that too. When he fought Jugo in chapter 116, he copied Jugo's technique. I initially thought that Sukuna actually had fire abilities, but he doesn't actually have fire abilities. He just copied Jugo. He copied Megumi the whole fight. He's been using the 10 Shadows technique. The 10 Shadows is not his own technique. Whenever he copies anybody else's technique, he copies the technique, but he makes it significantly more powerful. So for example, when Megumi summons Nue, right? It's never actually that big. When Sukuna summoned Nue, it was actually gigantic. It was actually ridiculous. When you look at it, this all actually makes sense because we've never actually been told by the narrator what Sukuna's abilities actually are and to what extent he can actually copy other people's techniques. What are the limitations? So at this point in time, they've been left pretty much ambiguous to the point where it's been left to our own interpretation. That's why we can't really gauge how strong he is when you think about it. In addition, did anybody actually think that Mahoraga would be an exception to this rule? As far as we know, he could still get copied by Sukuna, which he's demonstrated right now. So to wrap up, I genuinely think it was sad that within Gojo's last moments and whatnot, he wasn't really able to spend that kind of time with either Yuta or Yuji and at least have any sort of exchange with him. They pretty much just had to watch him die helplessly. And I mean, Kashimo's joined the fight and whatnot, but the fact that Sukuna can copy abilities, this was definitely one of the saddest moments in anime history when you think about it. And to be honest, I still stick with the idea that Gojo got that ace treatment. And I'm talking in the sense that, you know, the good guys finally get a victory where, you know, they go through all this hard work where they save Ace and they get that W and everything's great. And then at a moment's notice, that victory's taken away where Ace is killed just like that. So all that hard work just goes into nothing. And then essentially it's basically a loss when you think about it. And then this is basically the same thing here. Gojo was declared the winner, not by the narrator, but by Kusakabe. But then in the next chapter, he's dead. And it's really the shock value that definitely hits me to that point. And honestly, it was an amazing chapter. And yes, I understand that the plot definitely has to progress and move forward and whatnot. But man, this one definitely hit pretty hard, man. Gege, you're gonna have a lot of people after you, man. But man, those are my thoughts. Like, comment, subscribe, and man, I'll holler at y'all later, man. Peace.